the paranormal to the extraordinary, from the weird to the wonderful. This is On the Odd.
Average about 4,000 words a day. You focus on both fiction and nonfiction. You have a degree in science, which I really need to find out exactly what avenue of science that is. And you've written a ton of articles. You also work with MUFON. You have worked with the popular AlienSkin magazine. I'm not sure if that was a paper magazine. I recall it being just online. I'm not 100% sure.
It was.
Okay. And other, basically the gamut of other magazines. Your name basically flies. If you Google Rob Shelsky, you really find out that I'm going to call it a legacy. It goes way back, and it really touches upon a lot of different avenues. So yeah.
Well, not that far back. Only to about 2010. Hey, give me a break there, huh?
Hey, it's almost a decade, sir.
Yeah, it is. Wow, that's a long time.
I like to make everybody feel old. But
did it.
Welcome you to the show. Welcome, Rob Shelsky. How are you, Rob?
Hi, how are you? And thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out. We really appreciate it. All right, well, have a good night.
Yeah, it was fun.
What if I could just ask you? All right, you have a degree in science. What kind of degree in science, and what science?
Well, it was general sciences, but with emphasis on the hard sciences: physics, chemistry, geology, astronomy, paleontology. Not quite such a hard one, but you name it. If there was a science, I took it and added it to it. Actually, I have the credits almost equal to another degree in it. So.
Wow.
And yeah, I love science. I love learning. I love knowledge.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get from you. You're like one of these ever-expanding people where you feel as though you've wasted a day if you haven't learned something. and I think that's
right. Yeah, actually, that expanding thing sounded a bit like a fat joke.
Well, no.
If the shoe fits, right?
It's funny that I spoke to somebody the other day about tattoos, like in the spiritual side of it and symbolism, and I was mentioning how I once wanted a tattoo for a weekend, and then I just, I talked myself out of it, thankfully. But I wanted the symbol of Mercury, and they said, "Oh, well, that's the fat guy tattoo." I'm like, "What? Like, what did you call me?" Yeah, it kind of threw me for a little bit. I'm like, "All right, well, screw you."
Are you talking about the element Mercury or the symbol?
It's like a physical symbol. It's
right.
It's like a stick figure.
Yeah, and why did you want that symbol?
Oh, I don't remember. I don't know. It was the 90s. I worked in a new age bookstore. I was bored. I was probably drawing something or looking through a book and say, "Hey, that's a cool symbol." I make no reason for wanting it.
Well, your 90s is like my 70s, although I don't remember a lot about the 70s.
Well, I'm 45, so you don't have to share your age if you don't want. But so I'm, I've been around a little.
Around the block, at least.
Yeah, a little bit. So
a little bit.
What happened with AlienSkin Magazine? Because they were, I remember, a pretty big resource for. I almost think they were like a precursor to creepypasta in a lot of ways. Well, I don't know if you visit creepypasta, but
yeah, I have actually. With AlienSkin, I became a resident columnist there, and also an field investigator for them as well. And I actually went on a paranormal mission to I'm trying to think of the name of the mansion. It was up in South Ohio. I want to say Peyton or something like that. But we did a 3-day weekend there looking for ghosts with all, the equipment and everything. But you name it, we've done it. I've been to the Devil's Tramping Ground. I've been to the Brown Mountain Lights here in North Carolina. I've been to Gulf Breeze, Florida for the UFOs. I've been up the Hudson River Valley for UFOs.
That's another thing. You're very well traveled. You get everywhere. You're like an Indiana Jones.
Well, when you're chasing UFOs, you have to move fast.
Yeah, literally. I mean, a
you do,
lot of people.
The hotspots come and go.
I make the joke that whenever I'm trying to take a picture of something, I'm like, if a UFO came and went, I'd miss it. It's like I have no idea how to use my phone.
Well, the phone, yeah, I can't. I have trouble with the phone. My camera's no, and I always use a camera because it's a higher, quality picture. Yeah.
But everybody's got a phone. Everybody's got a camera phone with 9, 10 pixels, whatever it might be.
Well, which is actually pretty good. My first camera was only 1.5 megapixels. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think I spent about $500 on my first digital camera, which was like 1.2 megapixels.
Right.
And it took a floppy disk.
But as a MUFON field investigator, I had to have a pretty good camera. So
yeah,
and the phones just at that time wouldn't do it. Well, at that time, it was last year or so.
So you worked with you currently work with, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the Mutual UFO Network, better known as MUFON.
I did. I was a field investigator for them up until late last year, and then I ceased to do that because I did not like where the organization was heading.
Actually, I guess that was another question I had: is what is going on with the organization? I mean, I don't know too much about them except for the fact that they've just been around seemingly forever in the entire UFO community.
They have, and they've been an excellent database. The problem with MUFON is they're marvelous at collecting data, but they don't do anything with it. They don't massage the data. They collect and collect and collect, and they're excellent at that. The field investigations are rigorous. The training we get is pretty darn strong, and it is always reviewed by your director when you submit it. And it goes through quite a process. So the data is pretty darn reliable. The only problem is I never saw that they did much with it. I mean, why wasn't someone running some statistical analyses on these? And people have on MUFON data, but MUFON itself not so much. And then recently, the inner circle, as it's been referred to, has changed behavior and personnel, and it just wasn't my thing anymore. For others, it may be fine, but for me, it was not. I just did not want something that I thought was hard data suddenly being influenced strongly by someone at the top that was a medium and believed she was trans-channeling an alien and that sort of thing. It's fine if you believe that. I don't. And so that was my problem.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of curious about MUFON in the sense of, I mean, it's definitely possible that money could be getting funneled there from a very high power, and controlling the end result, I guess.
The biggest contributors are the ones who are on, at the very top. So, you take it from there, whatever conclusions you want to draw.
Now, are you allowed to talk about things that you've seen through MUFON, or is there like a disclosure agreement of some sort?
No, I can talk about it. Mostly, it's not so much what I saw as what I went and investigated after somebody else saw it. That's the problem with MUFON field investigations. I want to, my problem is I've always been my own investigator, and I did enjoy field investigating for MUFON. I enjoyed my state director, Lakita Adams, very much. But the problem is that you always got there after the fact, and there's usually very little hard evidence on the ground at that point, and it's kind of unreliable. So that's one of the reasons I left MUFON too. Is I want to do my own investigations. I want to go where the hotspots are. I mean, I've spent nights camped out at Gulf Breeze, Florida, and on the Hudson River Valley, in the old Jewish cemetery they had there overnight, with people driving by and hooting and hollering at me, and other people that were there. So,
wow. It sounds like quite an adventure, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is an adventure, and it's a lot of fun, and you meet some fantastic and interesting people. And I have managed to spot some UFOs that way.
Really? So you'll find a hotspot. You'll, literally camp out there, basically living, I guess, as openly as you possibly can, because if you get a hotel, you can't see the sky.
Right.
So, do you have footage that you might have caught, or is this, or I guess, what kind of things did you see, and what did you do with them? I mean, did you go to MUFON and say, "Hey, look what I found," or do you do something else with the footage or evidence that you bring up?
It's kind of funny because
that brings, it becomes a weird thing there,
Well, I actually saw a UFO over Greensboro here in North Carolina late last year, and it was a broad daylight. And the funniest thing was,
Wow,
my state director goes, "Well, why didn't you report?" And I go, "Gosh, I don't know. Being the field investigator, I should have, I suppose, but I didn't." But it's just one more. To me, that's what MUFON was becoming, just an endless listing of sightings.
Sounds a little militaristic.
Well, they have to control it to a certain degree to make sure the data is reliable. We have to interview the witnesses personally. We have to go out to the actual site. We have to investigate it. We have to check what airplanes were in the area. We have to check flight plans. You name it. What were the weather conditions? You have to look all this up and add it to your report because it all impacts what they might have seen. There was one woman, for example, that saw a silver globe spinning, and that was over near Raleigh, Durham. And I interviewed her, and then I went to the site. And she said it was cloudy, and it appeared in the clouds, and for about the amount of time changes, of course. And when I first spoke to her, it was 5.5 seconds, and then it ended up being closer to 30 by the time we were done. So there, right away, little red flags go up. It's like, are you tailoring the story to make me happier? And then I went and checked, and there was a landing strip, a private airport, within 100 yards of where she was talking about, and also the RDU airport was there. And on cloudy days, and when the weather's right, the wind is the wrong way, these planes will have to circle around as they come. And as the plane's coming through the clouds, it's at low altitudes, and when it's heavy cloud like that, you might only see the nose, and I think that's what she was seeing.
I mean, all of that research, I think, is very attractive for a research, especially when you're talking about I'm almost calling it a company, but organization that, researches phenomenon like a UFO or USO or any type of unidentified anything. So that had to have been kind of attractive to you, that, you're there first to figure out what it wasn't in a lot of ways. Like you need to rule out everything.
Oh, about 95% you rule out.
Mm-hmm.
Then about another 2% are questionable. But and in some cases, for instance, with this woman who saw this, I couldn't rule it out entirely in my report. I could just base it on the other items that were in the area and the other alternative things it could be. So MUFON then submits the report to its higher level, and of course they say, no, this probably was not a UFO sighting.
And it had to have been very important to kind of have like a self-debunking type of mentality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're not objective about UFOs, then frankly, I don't want to talk to you. If anyone says, "Oh yes, I believe in UFOs," I hate that term. Immediately, I hate that term.
Right.
I don't believe. Belief is something, is having faith in something which you have no evidence to support.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to have beliefs. I'm not against belief systems, but when it comes to UFOs, I don't believe UFOs or in UFOs. I theorize that they do exist based on the given evidence, the available data. In my opinion, they are a fact based on that evidence. I would say 98% probability that they exist.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I believe in very little. I believe in, I'm a very skeptical person. I think when I think about it, I kind of can't imagine there just being our species on this. Well, not just our species, but just the species that are on our planet. I just think it's egotistical to think that we're the only. So I welcome the idea of these visitors, but yeah, I mean, unless
Well, you see, that's where we differ. I don't.
Oh, okay. See, lights in the sky just do nothing for me, I guess.
Well, lights in the sky don't do much for me either. My advice to people is if you see a UFO and if it starts getting closer to you and looks like it's zeroing in on you, and sometimes they do, they must have detection equipment better than ours, or maybe we do have that now. I don't know. But my advice is run like hell.
Yeah,
Go.
it's a good point.
If you can take pictures and photos and feel you're in safety, fine. But if this thing is coming towards you, my advice is to get out of there, because my experience that I've seen in data collection and research is that UFOs can be quite deadly and quite dangerous to many people, to property, to animals. They cause injuries, they cause illnesses, and they cause deaths, and far more deaths than people are aware of.
That's interesting. So we should have kind of a healthy fear of this.
Oh, I think you should always have a healthy fear of the unknown.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, if you approach a snake, if you don't know what kind of snake it is, and it might be venomous, you should have a healthy fear. Yeah. So yes, absolutely.
Do you know if any nations are publicly investigating UFOs?
Nations have.
I know they
Belgium,
have, but
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did a quick search on this, and I've seen the history of this and that and that and this, but it doesn't seem like there's much going on right now.
I think it's because it already has. I think it's because it already has. France did it and released a public report on it, which basically said UFOs exist. Belgium released a great deal of data, which basically said UFOs exist. Brazil was heavily into it and releasing data publicly, and then suddenly clammed up. Canada's the same way. Canada's had some remarkable UFO experiences, and even a former minister of the Canadian government, member of parliament, and I think a member of the government itself, said they're real, they're here, and there's something we need to do about it. Winston Churchill in England, after World War II, had it investigated, but the data is almost never revealed except for like with France and Brazil to a certain degree and Belgium, but the rest of them clam up immediately once they find the information, and even we can't get it. I mean, when Jimmy Carter was running for president, he said he saw a UFO in Georgia driving home one night, and when he was president, he would get it all released. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nothing. Ronald Reagan supposedly saw a UFO when he became president. Nothing. He let loose a few statements that were very indicative that UFOs and aliens might be real, but he never released any information about it at all. Not one way or the other. That's the intriguing part. If there's nothing there, why not say publicly there's nothing there? Here's the paperwork, the data we have, and there's nothing there. However, there was that Pentagon video just recently released that shows a jet chasing a UFO. So there you go.
I haven't seen that, actually.
It's pretty compelling.
I'm going to look for... Now, during the 2016 election, I remember Hillary Clinton, for a very short period, I think she said it twice, that if elected, she was going to get to the bottom of the UFOs, of what the maybe held back. Now, this is somebody who is a first lady, somebody who's there for 8 years, and she couldn't. I mean, I'm pretty sure she has an interest in it. I know there's a photograph of her carrying a particular UFO book, and as a sitting first lady, she couldn't get to the bottom of it. And I'm just wondering, I don't think the president is brought up to snuff on this. Like, there's really no need for them, right, to know about UFOs. Donald Trump might try to muscle into this kind of information, just because, maybe his ego is speaking out. But, I think since, the 40s, with all of that, when a lot of this stuff really started to come to surface, and maybe throughout the 50s, but after that, I mean, do you think that presidents have known about this?
That's
I don't know where I'm going
question.
with that exactly.
Yeah, I think Reagan knew something. I definitely think he did, because he made allusions to it on several different occasions in different ways. And there's a lot of belief that the Star Wars program, the Strategic Defense Initiative, which he initiated at the cost of billions, wasn't really about the Russians at all, but was about what was up there in space already. And
they
so
really
he
goofed on him for that.
Yeah, but I think I'm sorry, they really goofed on him?
Yeah, if you remember, they were saying it's never going to work. And, I mean, Israel uses the same system right now, and it works beautifully.
The Strategic Defense Initiative?
They use
the Star Wars program, so-called?
They use a system that shoots missiles out of the air when they're launched towards...
Oh, right. You're talking ground to air. Right. Yes, of course. Yes, we do have that, and America has it too. We've been testing.
It's a form of it. It's not exactly what
we're
talking about.
Of it. Right, but it's not what we had envisioned.
It's a part of it, I think. But
right.
no, it's not laser beams from satellites, no.
No, and actually, I believe it's called the Iron Dome in Israel, and I believe it's missiles from America that we've given them to do this with, the so-called Iron Dome to keep out incoming missiles. And it seems to work rather efficiently.
Yeah.
In space, though, however, I mean, there's a lot that seems to be going on we don't know about. There is that mini space shuttle that has been up in in space for over a year. What's it doing up there? It can maneuver, it can do this, it can carry payloads. And they're just saying, well, it was doing research, and pretty mundane research. It's like, I don't think so. Secret launches, very secret. Lots of satellites launched secretly.
They're happening all the time. It's like,
right.
It's crazy.
And it's not just communications. I mean, how many communication satellites could you possisly need?
Yeah, it's a great point, actually. What do you need, like 6? Really?
Yeah, it's so there's a great deal going on in space that we're not aware of, and of course, there's an awful lot of video of UFOs in near Earth orbit, even around the space station, our space shuttles. I remember clearly watching live. I can't remember her name, but she was the commander of the space shuttle, and she was in orbit, and she's talking and she's floating in the air in the shuttle. And we're viewing it on live cam, and she says, "There's that alien spacecraft again."
What?
And then suddenly she's cut off. You still see her, but you don't hear her, and her mouth is still moving. She's still talking, and that was that. That was the end of it.
And honestly, as Americans, and seeing what goes on, like with CNN when Bernie Sanders is in the middle of talking and they just cut him off, we know that that's pretty much exactly what was going on, right? I mean, it's like, shut up.
In her case, they switched her to a private coded channel, and she's not the only one. I mean, on flights to the moon, the astronauts just said, we're being followed by something, and they go, well, it's probably your booster rocket. It's probably tailing you. And it's like, no, I see the booster rocket. It's not that. This is something else, And of course, suddenly they must privately get the message to stop talking about it. But this goes on and on and on. But ham radio operators have picked up a lot of stuff from the original missions to the moon, because they weren't nearly as well watched as they later became. I mean, as far as guarded, as being protected by NASA.
No.
So,
I'm friendly with another podcaster named Adam Curry. I don't know if you've ever heard of him from the old MTV days. And he does.
No, but I eat his food a lot.
I love curry, very spicy.
I enjoy curry. Yeah.
Me too, actually. Well, he owns curry.com. Ironically enough. He's the guy who invented podcasting. Like, he was one of 2 people who came up with the RSS feed concept, and is really, really intelligent guy. He does a podcast called No Agenda. It's a pretty long-running podcast. And he has some very interesting theories, and he was talking one day about moon bases and his opinion of things. It just doesn't make sense that we wouldn't, like, if we're going to the moon, we're going to try to build something there. At least that was
theory. The plan. That was the plan.
And
it was a space
race.
First person to get to the moon, and of course you want to see it's controlled. The moon is the high ground. You look up every night, or even in the afternoon or morning, sometimes you'll see the moon. It's the high ground. It commands our skies. And whoever's there has the high ground. And any military expert will tell you that's what you want, the high ground.
He was the first person that I remember talking about a hollow moon. And the way he was describing it, and I know you have a similar opinion of a hollow moon, the way he was describing it is kind of like a lava rock, where there's caverns inside. It's not a fully, in his opinion, it's not like a fully perfectly hollow moon. It's more like there's large caverns that make the density very light,
It could be, and I discussed that in my book too. We have a problem with the density of the moon; it's too low for its size.
Right.
There's missing matter there, and And so that could be accounted for by lava tubes, extensive lava tubes running everywhere, and also cavities in the moon. Yes, that's absolutely could be
Like a
true.
lava rock, right? I mean, that's like a sponge in a way.
Well, you're thinking of pumice.
Oh,
No, it
yes, you're
wouldn't.
absolutely
Yeah,
right.
right. Yeah, no, it wouldn't be pumice. It would be
Yeah, you're
more like
100%.
what's
Yeah.
happening in Kilauea right now. You're getting lava flowing underground, and
Yep.
then it drains out, and it's solidified around it. So you have this tube, and these tubes might be all over the surface of the moon, or actually just under it. And that could be the reason. But the problem with that theory is, and I did look into it, and it's a possibility, possibly even a probability. But the problem is, there's other problems with the moon that theory doesn't account for, because it isn't just the low density of the moon we're talking about here. There's other problems too. For instance, it rings like a bell, and it will ring for hours. When they drop one of the lunar landings back onto the moon, it rang like a bell for hours.
Serious?
Now,
Like it physically resonated?
like a bell, like a bell. Now, everything will resonate to some degree. You strike a
Sure.
rock, and there's a very brief resonation. But on the moon, it went on for hours. And one NASA scientist said that this raises the startling possibility the moon may be hollow. And the quotations on this go on and on and on. Another scientist said that it's easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence. There's just so much strange about it. They have seismographs on the moon recording moonquakes. Well, number one, there shouldn't be any moonquakes. And then scientists said, oh, well, maybe it's tidal forces with the Earth. And they said, yeah, that could be it. And then they calculated where the moonquakes would occur based on tidal stresses. The moonquakes aren't occurring in those places. So, I mean, that's not working either. Also, the seismographs show moonquakes, but they don't go through the core of the moon. And so one scientist said, well, this raises the possibility that either the moon has a very strange core that doesn't permit vibrations to travel through it, or there's no core at all, that it's hollow.
That's really wild. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I mean, and this goes on and on. The oddities with regard to the moon, and also the stuff we're seeing on the moon for the last 5 centuries in a report commissioned by NASA itself goes on and on, too. We have seen streaks, we have seen beacons, we have seen mists, we have seen so-called volcanoes. There are no volcanoes on the moon, but they have been reported lasting for months at a time. It's red glows. We have seen beacons, flashes, tracks. In fact, one crater in particular scientists nicknamed it the Blue Gem, because so many blue glows and flashes have been seen around that crater, and it's the Aristarchus crater.
So we really don't know too much about the moon.
No, we don't. We don't know, or maybe we just don't know enough. I mean, we may know a lot. Oh, and by the way, the surface of the moon, the 3 top layers of rock on the moon are reversed. The densest is on the top, then the next densest, and then, if that's a word, densest. Sounds like I'm saying densest. And
Yeah,
in the 3rd layer down is the least dense. And that's exactly what you get if someone was pumping the interior out onto the surface. You'd get it in reverse order, the layers of rock.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah, and there's also Neptunium on the moon. I think it's 237. I want to say 237. I may be wrong there. But it's a highly not highly, but it's a radioactive isotope, lifespan of about 2.5 million years. There should be nothing. The moon, if the moon is 4.5 billion years old, there should be none on the moon. There's none on the Earth. We can only make it inside of a cyclotron, atom smasher, if you will, and but it doesn't exist in nature on Earth except in the most trace amounts, and yet it seems to be on the moon. Helium-3 is on the moon. We don't have it here on Earth to any degree at all. We have other isotopes on the moon that we can't account for. Now, these shouldn't be there. If the Earth came from shot off the moon after the impact with the planet Theia, none of this should be there. It should be the same as our Earth's mantle. It should be made of the same material. And there's a problem with that impact theory, which is what all the scientists are going by right now. If Theia impacted the Earth and they smashed together that hard, and pieces were flying everywhere from both of them, the moon should have coalesced from pieces of both Theia and the Earth. Yet we find no isotopic signature for Theia at all, strictly from Earth, the oxygen ratio content of the rock. So if Theia hit, where did it go? Why is there none of its material on the moon? Why is the far side of the moon's crust thicker than the near side? Why are the Maria, those big dark sea lava areas on the moon, only on our side of the moon, the side that faces the Earth? But there's none on the other side. Why are the large craters on the moon so shallow, but the small ones so deep? And of course, the two Soviet scientists, Fasin and Sherbakov, who came up with the spaceship moon theory, can account for all this. The only theory that accounts for all the oddities of the moon, and we have 5 or 6 main theories of the moon's origin now, but the only one that accounts for all the oddities of the moon is the Fasin-Sherbakov theory. The only one, and that's the spaceship moon theory. So there you go.
You know, you may have heard about that the Japanese are sending a device that I think they're called JAXA, the Japanese equivalent to NASA. They have a device that they want to send to the moon that's going to insert or drill, I'm not sure exactly how, a measurement tool that's going to go 2 meters into the surface of the moon. And I'm just thinking that could crack the entire moon right in half. You know, something 6 feet, essentially, about 6 feet. Just, you know.
Why would that crack them?
I don't know. I'm just, if it's hollow, I'm thinking, and it's.
Well, it's not hollow. It's not an eggshell. The Sherbakov and Vassili-Sherbakov theory estimates that there is an outer crust of the moon.
But if it
the whole
resonates
moon is entirely,
so easily.
Well, no, you would have that if you had a hollow in the center. But they theorized there was a 25-mile thick layer crust around the surface of the moon, and then there was an inner steel, titanium shell, or some kind of metal alloy. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the small craters are so deep. The meteorites hit, they burrow in, and they make a deep crater. But the really big ones burrow in much further and would hit that shell and bounce off of it, and so you would have the more flattened.
I have premonitions of the moon cracking. So ever since I was a little kid, for whatever reason. It makes no sense. But as soon as I read about this, I'm thinking that's how they're going to make my stupid
not by
dream
going
come
drilling
true.
2 meters into the moon.
It could be that brittle. Come on, Rob, get on this with me. No,
the eggshell moon. You've come up with a new theory. The eggshell.
No, you made me feel better, actually. But that's the way I'm thinking of it, like an eggshell. But I mean, obviously, a very thick eggshell.
Oh no! Actually, the hollow moon theory. I know that your friend has the lava tube theory, and I do think that is definitely one of the runner-ups. But the hollow moon theory does not say that the entire moon is hollow. It just merely says the core was pumped out onto the surface in those dark area, the Maria that you see, those lava seas. That's the stuff that was pumped out.
I see.
And no, it would be just the core of the moon, which would still be quite huge, but nothing compared to the entire mass of the moon.
Now, why haven't we returned to the moon? Or have we?
We're warned off.
Yeah.
I mean, why haven't we? Over 40 years now, and we still haven't returned to the moon.
Everything's cheaper now, technology-wise.
We take photos of it, but we don't land on it. And when the Chinese do, their rover stopped working in hours of landing. And, I mean, we had more luck, but there's considerable evidence we have been warned away from the moon. Now, have you noticed NASA's talking about Mars? Let's go to Mars. Let's do this. Mars is that.
Mars is crazy far.
Yeah, I mean, the moon's only about 250,000 miles away, about 225,000 miles or so, right, depending on where it is in its orbit. But Mars is millions, tens of millions of miles
away. And if
I
were to go to Mars, I would want to launch off of the moon, not the Earth.
I'm not sure you'd want to go to Mars because less than
no,
50% of our probes make it to Mars.
Look, I barely like to take the train into Manhattan. I'm not a space traveling kind of person, even if it was something that was super easy. I like Earth, and I feel as though it's great to know about these places, but and I think that exploring the concept of getting to Mars is wonderful. But I really, when we could bring up so many questions about our closest sphere in the air, the moon. Let's conquer the moon before we, go
right.
to Mars.
And there's a lot of economic advantages. It's a much smaller gravity well. So if you want to launch something off to other planets,
right,
just
it makes
as you
sense.
said, it's better to do it from the moon than from Earth. You can mine the moon. You can get all the resources you need to build your colonies. We even have found water on the moon now. So it's not like we have to ship it up from Earth. So, and not to mention astronomy would be fantastic on the far side of the moon. no radio chatter from Earth, no radio waves, no lights, no nothing. And there's all sorts of reasons to be on the moon.
Absolutely.
And it's so close. We've been there. We were there in the 60s,
Right.
for gosh sakes. I mean, why don't we have the base on the moon and lots of them? That's the big question.
And I'm a very big believer that we actually did go to the moon when we said we went to the moon.
Of course we did. Of course we did. That's a conspiracy theory. I don't buy into
Yeah,
at all.
okay.
I was just a kid at the time, but I sat up all night and watched the moon landing, and you were hearing stuff from ham radio operators. It wasn't as if only NASA was giving out information. You are aware that China, Communist China, and Soviet Russia was also monitoring the whole thing. And if it had been a hoax, and if they could have proven it was a hoax, trust me, they would have made it public. They would have loved to have humiliated the United States.
I completely agree.
But yeah, it's just no.
And I'm getting my ham radio license this summer with my 10-year-old son, maybe. So.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
I always like ham radios. I don't know why, but I always have, talking around the planet kind of thing.
Yeah, the Chinese make a really inexpensive one if you just wanted to kind of dabble with it. But in order to transmit, you do need that license. So.
Right, because you are transmitting. You're a radio station.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I'm going to bring up, get away from the moon just for a bit, and bring up something that my son and I love. My wife gets confused about it, and that's the Mandela Effect. I think I'm going to say that it's also important with the Mandela Effect to also be a self-debunker and to kind of accept the fact that you may be convincing yourself that you're remembering it one way when others tell you that it was one way. It's possible that we're just buying into some of this. Now, some of it I'm convinced I remembered in a completely different way. But I like the Forrest Gump thing. When it's just one word, I don't know if I'm fully on board with that. But the Berenstain Bears, I'm not even going to discuss. I mean, I'll discuss it. I'm not even going to be swayed one way, away from thinking that it was once one way and now it's another. I used to work for Scholastic Entertainment. I've been around children's books my whole life. I do graphic design work with them and coding. And I was so much of a nitpicky person when it comes to spelling things that I'm convinced that it was changed.
Well, the problem is you cannot. First of all, with the Mandela Effect, psychiatrists say, well, this is just the result of false memories. Okay, false memories. We all have them. We remember memories. We have memories of memories of memories of. I remember going to my first day of kindergarten. Well, I don't really. I remember a memory of that. I have memories of memories of memories because each time you remember something, you're forming a new memory, and that's a memory of a memory.
Yeah.
So of course, false memories exist, and people make mistakes, and they do it all the time. Two things I have to raise, though, as an issue here. One, with the Mandela Effect, when these people are getting it wrong, they're getting it wrong the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and they're all getting it wrong the same way.
Which is wild. I mean, that's
wild.
Where things get a little bit questionable. Absolutely.
Right. And number two, we often find evidence that physical evidence to support their claims. I mean, you mentioned Forrest Gump and life is like a box of chocolates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, rephrase it the way the movie says it is now. Life was like a box of chocolates. Does that make any sense to you? He's sitting down and he's trying to tell someone what life is like. And he's saying, well, life was like a box of chocolates.
It doesn't. It doesn't make sense on any level.
Is it not like a box of chocolates anymore? Then why even bring it up? The movie Moonraker. I mean, you have Jaws, the guy with all that metal work in his mouth, his metal teeth.
Yeah.
He falls in love with this young blondish woman, looks like an adult version of Heidi. And he smiles at her, and you can just see the bond forming, and he flashes all these teeth. Excuse me. And then all of a sudden, you think, well, she's going to be repulsed by that when she sees the teeth. But instead, she smiles, and what do you see?
I don't remember. This is one thing I don't. I'm not a Bond person.
Well, I remember, and tens of thousands of people remember having a mouthful of braces.
Interesting.
But now she doesn't have them, and the actress says no, she never did. Yet, if you take that scene without her having the braces, there's no bond, no linking thing going on between the two of them. She's just smiling back because he's got all these silver teeth. It doesn't even make sense. But there's more. I mean, your Berenstain books, people have actually found copies and photos of copies that show it with the different spelling. And Ford with this little filigree on the crosshatch of the F in Ford. They said it's always been that way, and yet a guy has produced a medallion struck for a World's Fair quite a few decades ago, and it shows it without it.
Wow.
Other people have shown cars where the front of the car has the Ford insignia with the filigree, and the back of the car doesn't. They found them in junkyards, yet Ford insists beyond a shadow of a doubt that no, it's always been that way. They've never changed their logo. Company after company, Kit Kat, with a hyphen, without a hyphen. I remember without. Jiffy popcorn, Jiffy peanut butter. I remember it being Jiffy. It's Jif. So now some of those people can just mistake and get wrong the same way. But the odd part is when they get it wrong the same way. The color chartreuse, which is one of my favorites. You know the color chartreuse, right?
Yes. I mean, I know that it's I remembered it as red, but yeah, it is green-ish.
It's a very yellowish lime green, but when people get it wrong, they always remember it as being reddish brown, reddish purple, maroon.
But that's one that really blew me away because as a graphic artist, I have color books, I have color charts, everything, and I always take pride in calling colors in funny ways. Like I'll just say, "Oh, this is sage green," and it's like, "Oh, that is sage green." Wow. And chartreuse to me is a light burgundy. Still, to this,
right? And
or a
when you
way
get it
to
wrong,
describe wine. To be honest,
yeah,
with
and you get it wrong the same way. Yeah, you could say plum color, but everyone I had a roommate. And I said, "What color chartreuse?" He says, "Well, it's a reddish maroon, reddish purple." And I go, "No, it's yellow green." But this goes on and on.
Yeah.
But we have even more evidence. We have physical evidence. I was a Boy Scout. We used to shake hands with our left hand because, as it says in the manual, even now, it is the hand closest to the heart. Because the heart's it's on the left side of the chest, supposedly. But it isn't. The heart is centered. One chamber of the heart is on the right side of the body, and the other two chambers cross over to the left slightly, but the heart is centered.
I have to look for that because I'm actually a Cub Scout leader, and my son's a Cub Scout.
Yep. In my new book, I quote that. I actually quote the exact line from the manual.
Oh wow!
Also, your kidneys. There's a martial arts book that says when you're doing kidney martial arts, do not do rapid punches to the lower back because that's where the kidneys are, and you can cause them to have blood in their urine, so avoid punching people there. Well, the kidneys aren't there anymore. They're they're up under the rib cage and far more protected. So there's all sorts of changes. The human skull, the eye sockets used to be empty. Now there's an internal bone structure that protects the brain. The nasal cavity of the skull used to be an open hollow. Now we see a thin bone going down the middle of it. Stuff seems to be changing all the time.
And it's like I'm misremembering that. Yeah. I'm sorry, go on.
Right. But I mean, a nurse would take your pulse. She would put a forefinger on the back of your wrist, and then she'd put her thumb on the front of your wrist, or vice versa. And she'd take your pulse at the center of your wrist, right below your hand. Not so anymore. Now to take your pulse, you have to take it over on one side under the thumb because that's where the artery is. Well, why for decades were nurses taking it and doctors taking it at the center of your wrist if the better place to take it was about an inch away?
Wait, tell me this again. I was always told you're not supposed to use your thumb because it has a pulse in it. But you're saying the actual spot.
They might be using their thumb to hold the wrist in position on the back side of them, and then using the other finger, the index finger or whatever finger they're using for the other. But they've switched position on it now where they're using it. Mm-hmm. The rib cage, there used to be free-floating ribs that weren't attached to the sternum. They came down below the sternum. Now they're all attached to the sternum. And yet I've seen skeletons on Halloween all my life that showed free-floating ribs on the lower section of the rib cage.
Well, I think chiropractors even have, they talk about a free-flowing rib cage And if it is attached, it's not like a chiropractor can, move that. That's just not possible.
No, it's not. And I mean, this goes on, and it isn't just with the with ribs or the human body. It covers all sorts of things. And how do you account for that? And it could, and then of course there are people who are remembering different times lines, like Lorena Garcia wakes up in bed one morning and her apartment looks pretty much the same, but minor tchotchkes look different or some in different positions. She goes to work. She finds out she doesn't work in that department. The people there don't know her, though she knows them. And they tell her she works over on the other side of the building in another department. So she has to go over there, and she doesn't know anyone. She doesn't even know what job she's doing. Her boyfriend of the last 7 months has disappeared along with his son, as if he never existed. And the ex that she broke up with 7 months before is suddenly still her boyfriend. Her sister, who supposedly had shoulder surgery, as she remembers it, suddenly no longer does, and even showed her that she doesn't have the scar. She was so upset, she went to a doctor. She then went to a psychiatrist. She hired a private investigator, tried to find her boyfriend. No sign they ever existed. So she finally posted a plea on the internet. Can someone help me in any way, shape, or form? I don't know what's happening to my life. She's not alone. I don't pin my hopes or ideas as to whether they're real or not on just one person's testimony, but
Sure.
I go by numbers, and there's numerous testimonies of this happening to people, and people disappearing.
Well, people disappearing is just it's like a manic phenomenon. It seems it happens so often.
Almost 1 million people in the United States alone disappear every year. Of that, approximately 8% are never found again. Now, if you discount all the people who were murdered and buried somewhere, all the people kidnapped, spouses taking other people's kids, all that sort of thing, you're still left with around that 8%. And that's only the United States. That comes to around 50,000 people minimum a year disappearing permanently forever. And that includes people who want to start new lives and just get rid of their old life. Now, Australia has last count, around 30,000 a year. And every country in the world is experiencing this. Add these all together, you have hundreds of thousands, even over 1 million or more people disappearing permanently from the face of the earth every year. And by the way, this goes back to ancient Roman and Greek times.
Wow.
People would simply seem to vanish.
That's a really wild statistic. Yeah,
I made it up. No.
Damn you, Rob. No,
no, I researched it. As near as I can come to, that's the reliable statistics.
When I came across the Mandela Effect 3 years ago, maybe, something like that, none of it was really making too much sense to me. Like, I was just like, it doesn't, I don't know, maybe. But the two things that really triggered me, and as a musician, and as somebody who knows, I feel as though I understand rock music, that the end of Queen, you're very familiar with this, I'm sure. When Queen ends, there's an entire outro that's just gone for voice wise. Like it's missing, and you've heard it. There's evidence online of a residual existence by everyone else in the world.
Are you talking about the last line where "We are the champions of the world, my friends"? Yeah.
Now,
it's gone.
I played it for my 10-year-old son, who also remembers it being there. And that's what got him into it. Now, that started making me question it a little bit more, though. Granted, it fits there very well, but is it just kind of? I know you talked about this on another show about. Hold on, I made a note of what it was, but basically, data corruption. Is it possible that this is data and it's our built-in, I guess, our minds trying to fill in the missing data with a memory that just never existed?
No, because I actually saw an old video of them singing of my friends, "We Are the Champions." There's actually one online on YouTube.
I know there's a live version, and I've seen it, but I don't think I ever saw it prior to that. And it still didn't sound right to me. I think it was in a different key.
Well, I don't know. I remember being my friends, and I've always sung it that way. I mean, I was a Queen fan,
Yeah.
and that was one of my favorite songs. But you do know that also the geography of the Earth is changing too.
Hmm.
We're losing islands. We're losing land masses. If you look at the TV series Friends, the second season, the Bracelet Buddy episode.
Well, this is the other thing that triggered me. This was the second thing about the Mandela Effect that you're going to talk about that made me just go, what the hell's going on? So I'm sorry, go on. I love this.
No, but you're right. But there's an island off the southwest coast of Australia that doesn't exist, not in our timeline.
Right.
If you look at Dazed and Confused, there's a globe in a classroom, and this is filmed on site. It was a cheaply done film, teenage angst.
I saw it in theaters.
Good movie.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a huge landmass, about 1/5 the size of Australia, again, off the west coast of Australia, slightly southwest. It doesn't exist. I personally, on an I Dream of Jeannie episode, found a globe, and it shows a landmass, a large island, off the southern tip of South America, slightly to the west of South America. I mean, just almost under it, just a hair to the west of the central point. It shows the mountains, and people say, oh, well, that's a key or a logo. No, I enlarged it, high resolution it, and terrible word, high resolution. But that's what I did. And I checked it out. It shows mountains on it. It shows an inlet. I mean, it's not a key, a logo, or a legend. Also in that same episode on that globe, there shows a large landmass just to the west of Central America. And it's right between the heads of Tony, of I Dream of Jeannie, and some other astronaut. And it shows a large landmass there, and it's bisected at the lower end. It shows a strait or a river running through. It looks almost like a larger island and a much smaller one that was once part of it, sort of cut in half.
Have you posted those pictures? Or
yes, I have. In fact, on YouTube, I have a thing on Mandela Effect. Anyone can look it up and see these pictures themselves.
I'm going to look for it tonight.
People argue, oh, no, those are keys. No, I have a photo on that same presentation that shows all the keys and logos on that globe. I've got green arrows pointing right to them, and clearly they are not these. Whatever these are, they show mountains, rivers, straits, harbors. They're irregular. They are not keys, logos, or legends. What are they doing?
Keys usually have a frame as well. Like they're usually within something that's very, very, you could see it even if it's blurry. You could see that there would be an outline. These are irregular shapes. I'm kind of taking into compensation of motion blur for Dazed and Confused, for instance. But, the image is clear enough. You could see the motion blur, and you could see what it would affect. And you could see the shape is really it's a natural mass. Right.
And yet Mad Men, in that same spot, a lot of people claim that was a landmass as well. And I've looked at it closely, and it is a pyramidal shaped structure. It's looks like a little house that a child would draw, with the peaked roof and the square box for a bottom. And yet oddly on it, the picture, what's pictured on it is a mountain with snow on it. And some say, well, that's because people vaguely remember that there was a landmass there, and that's why they put that on the logo. But I discount the Mad Men one because it's clearly a logo. But with the ones I found in I Dream of Jeannie, they're clearly not logos. They have like these clipper ship designs, of a ship sailing in the Atlantic, and it's clear enough where you can clearly see them. And when you see these other landmasses, they clearly are not this. And of course, Australia doesn't have and I don't know why always Australia. Even on my globe, it shows a landmass to the west of Australia as well. So one off of South America, one off of Australia, and one up in the middle of the Pacific. Far larger than Hawaii. I mean, we're talking something that's quite huge. And of course, Hawaii would be another 2,000 miles to the west. So this is in sight of Central America almost. I mean, not in sight visually, but on the globe, it's much closer to there than it is to Hawaii.
And you don't just make a mistake on a globe, right? I mean, it's not like, oh yeah, that was one that got out of the factory. No, I'm sure
and they're different globes.
Yeah.
They're different globes with different land masses on them, not the same, and from different decades. We're talking some from the 70s, some from the 90s, some from 2000. It's like, no. And if a company is making these kind of massive errors on their globes, somebody should be suing them.
Right. Yeah. They're creating a conspiracy.
And again, the one Dazed and Confused was a school globe, and those were expensive at the time. They weren't cheap plastic things like we have now.
Now, when I first was reading about Mandela Effect, I immediately thought of deja vu, which is something I no longer experience, or I haven't experienced it in well over a decade, but I used to experience it very often. And I always felt like deja vu was a ripple in time, and if I wanted to get really forward-thinking, or however you want to look at it, I don't know if this sounds a little too wacky, I always felt as though at some point we're going to be able to travel within different dimensions or parallel universes or end time, whether it's, that is kind of the same thing in my eyes. And I always felt like deja vu was a ripple in that, and it kind of messed with things because as human beings, we're not going to be able to do anything perfectly. Do you think there's any correlation between deja vu and the Mandela Effect?
Well, there could be. I mean, if there are parallel universes, one of the things deja vu might be, excuse me, is that you're tapping in to a parallel universe that's very close to ours. And you could actually be remembering something from it, or you may be from that timeline, and then you experience something in this timeline which is slightly off time on it, and so for you it's a repetition. There's a lot of people that are thinking that people who remember this, remember that, they're from different timelines, and that they've merged, and this is because of CERN or because of quantum computers. But there's lots of types of deja vu. There's a déjà vécu, which means I've already lived. Déjà senti, already felt. Déjà visité, I've already visited. Déjà vu, I've already seen, and then it goes on smell, scent, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of different déjà vus. And of course, scientists try to say, oh no, this is just a little trick, a neurological trick of the brain where it's like a negative feedback loop. But I've had it where I can tell what the person's going to say next, and then they say it. That's no feedback loop. I'm sorry. It's just
it's not at all.
It's just, but yeah, it's the problem with the Mandela Effect is we're not sure what's causing it, and the problem is it backdates. And it says, no, that's wrong because I clearly remember. I said, your memories are useless.
Yeah.
They don't apply because if a person comes back in time and changes it, so say Kennedy lived, he wasn't shot, and someone comes back in time and makes it so Kennedy was shot, then we all remember Kennedy being shot. Time is altered, history changes, and these are our memories. Then someone comes back again and changes it back. And then we would all remember him being alive and not being shot, except some of us with the Mandela Effect might remember it the other way, as with Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, our memory is just a generational memory.
Even your personal memories. If I go back into your past to, say, when you were 11 years old and change some major event in your life, like say your brother broke his arm, and say I intervened so he didn't break his arm, your memories now be quite clear that your brother never broke his arm. And yet if I went back and made it so he did break his arm, your memories right now would be that he broke his arm. Except for some people who still remember it the other way. That's the Mandela Effect. But see, you can't rely on your memory to say, oh no, I clearly remember that, and the Berenstain Bears. It's like, well, yes, you do remember it that way, but that's because you may remember it before it was altered or after it was altered.
See, Berenstain Bears was the joke in my family that they were Jewish. Berenstain is not a Jewish name.
Wasn't it? Right. I flipped it back and forth. So Berenstain, yeah. You mean Berenstain is not a Jewish name.
Right. The one in the bookstores today, Berenstain, A-I-N, is not a Jewish name.
Right, but you were joking about it when you were younger that it was a Jewish name. So
it was the family joke. Yeah, I mean that correct? We would. Yeah, and we made an entire stupid family joke about how Gumby and Pokey were Jewish, and we gave them Hebrew names, and it was all started from the fact that the Berenstain Bears were Jewish, and that's why the Papa Bear wore a hat.
How is Gumby a Yiddish word or something?
No, it's not. But we called them Gumby and Pishka or something. We can't. Come on, we were bored.
Yeah, I know. I used to watch Gumby and Pokey too.
Maybe Puka. I forget what we named them. Because we used to also goof on David and Goliath. Because like, hey, how come they don't make this for Jewish kids? And I used to love David and Goliath. And
I actually watched that too.
yeah, Davy, hey Davy.
I was pretty eclectic in my taste, So,
even if it's funny, if you watch Davy and Goliath even now, there's something about it. It's like, it's easy to watch. There's always a good message in there. Then they talk about Jesus and I get a little turned off. But no, I don't want to put it. It's a little heavy-handed
Jewish,
for any
you probably
religion.
would, So, but by the way, even with the Mandela Effect, the Bible's changing. I remember the Last Supper is having the chalice sitting in front of Christ on the table. It's not there anymore. It's off on the left on the wall, like a picture of it or something. Yeah, and quotations of the Bible are changing too. The lion lying down with the lamb. Nope. It's the wolf lies down with the lamb. And it's, according to many theological sources, it's always been, according to these theologians, that it's been wolf with the lamb. And yet you Google lion lies down with the lamb on the internet, see how many images of it come up.
What's
Hundreds.
interesting is that the Bible's originally written in, say, Aramaic. And then translated probably to a newer version of Hebrew, and then, to everything else.
Well, then to the Greek, and then to the Latin, and then to the English, and German, and French, and whatever.
And there were different words for all of this stuff, so that obviously there are interpretations. But there's also... Oh,
really? I mean, come on, you can't interpret...
No, I'm not trying to say that...
As a lion, I mean,
what I'm saying is there may be evidence, if you were to backtrack it to the original way.
Oh, I see.
Because it's not going to change. It's not going to change the overall story, but the translation, if even changes a little bit, it's going to screw up the entire translation, especially when there's more than one language involved. I'm curious about that. I'm gonna ask around about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt and of course, some people will also deliberately, for instance, the Mormon religion, the reason they don't drink wine is because they believe there was a mistranslation of the word water, and in whatever language it was, Latin or whatever, the word wine and water was so similar that it was just simply a mistranslation, and so that's why they don't drink wine, because they think it was water. Oh. So sure, mistranslations and people who think there are mistranslations abound, and that makes it very hard. But there are even preachers and ministers now who are complaining about the Mandela Effect. They don't like what it's doing. They don't like the way they think it's rewriting the Bible. They are very concerned about how meanings and definitions change, like faith, hope, and charity, faith, hope, and love. Which one is the correct one? That sort of thing. And they're arguing about all sorts of passages in the Bible, and including one where it says, I can't think of it offhand, but I believe it was in Isaiah, and it talks about there is only one God, and now it's changed and it says there is no God.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, and that scared people too. So,
well, if you had to go back and do something that is tiny, but is going to have some level of a tremendous amount of impact, you would do it to a religion that is followed by billions of people.
Oh, you could do it to a lot of things. Actually, it was the wolf and the lamb was Isaiah, so that one wasn't quite the one I was thinking of. But no, it was Isaiah. If you want to look it up, it's Isaiah 45:14, and it says the verse once, "Surely God is in thee, and there is none else. There is no God." And verse once read, "There is only one God." And so this goes on and on and on and on, apparently. And you can find them in the Psalms. You can find them all. And they're switching words around. And I'm not quite sure. I'm not a student of the Bible myself, so I can't really, tell you for sure one way or the other. But it does seem that most of the changes are coming about in the King James Version of the Bible. And various preachers do see it as the sign of end of days, the work of Satan and the evil.
Wow.
So,
yeah, I'm looking at this. And yeah, King James states there is no God. The Christian Standard and New American, which clearly says there is no other God. which is,
Right.
I think, the way the Christians would always say it. You know, they would say it's a sin to worship other
But why would it
idols.
say there is no God?
Yeah, that's more
That
than a
makes no
typo.
sense. Again, that's one of those Mandela effects that it doesn't make sense in the new version. There is no God. And so, yeah, but and I grew up with the King James Version of the Bible, and I remember saying there is no other God. But again, that's a memory, so it's hard to prove.
Mm-hmm. That's
But
what it's also a very personal thing, you know, and that's what I think, like you were saying, the fact that we're all experiencing the same thing at the same moment it's a bit scary, actually.
it is a bit scary, and again, of course, I'm one of those people that's not enough to collect the data. I also want to try to draw conclusions. And I think something's happening to our timeline. I don't know whether it's people from the future, whether it's quantum D computer programming that's causing it, or whether it is the CERN. I question the CERN one myself, but even one of the founders of Quantum D said that our quantum computers utilize parallel universe quantum computers to more quickly arrive with calculation results. And you can watch that on YouTube, his own seminar. So if a founder of Quantum D-Wave is saying this, then D-Wave Computers, I think, is the name of the place, but it might be Quantum or D-Wave. But even they're saying it themselves. And if we're tapping into other timelines with our quantum computers and getting information from them, having them calculate stuff for us, are we also having side effects that might be the Mandela effect?
That's interesting. I just wanted to squeeze in one more question because we went over the hour, and even though there's no limit, I don't want to drag you through your entire Friday evening. You have to spend your whole evening with me, Rob.
Could be worse.
Thanks. That's very kind of you. It is Shabbos. So, have you ever watched the television show Fringe? I don't know if you ever watched it.
Yes, I didn't watch all of it, but I watched a number of episodes from.
Not science fiction. You know, I'm not stating it's a documentary or anything, but they touched upon parallel universes and opening a portal and using drugs to induce deep states of meditation, which I mentioned to you earlier that I practice transcendental meditation. And I get into a decent, deep state of relaxation and meditation, but nothing to the point where I'm having out-of-body experiences or literally doing, visiting other planes, which I know that you also know quite a bit about, where some people claim to travel to Mars. And, I'm not at that point, but the TV show Fringe does touch upon crossing over to a very similar reality to ours. And I'm just kind of curious. It's almost their representation of New York at the time was almost an example of the way the Mandela effect could be explained. Like little things are changed, some big things.
Right. And what was your question exactly?
I wanted to know if you watched it and what you thought of that, and also.
Well, I think it's true. I don't think it's science fiction.
Oh no,
string theory.
The show is all I'm saying.
Right. The show is science fiction, but I think it's based on some fact. Our theory of everything, the string theory, demands that there be alternate realities. Our theory of the cosmos, the inflationary theory, demands that there be it's a multi-universe. Almost every theory we have now of the universe requires that there be parallel timelines. And some claim there's like 500,000. Others claim that it's absolutely infinite. In fact, quantum mechanics is now beginning to say that every time a consciousness makes a choice, another universe is created, and therefore you can't really die. And a physicist, quantum physicist, came up with the idea of quantum suicide or quantum immortality. Whereas, in other words, when you make the choice to commit suicide, you end in that timeline, but there's immediately another timeline is created because you made that choice. And when you make one choice, the other choice exists as well. Well, you didn't. So you weren't successful in your suicide. And you could do this indefinitely. Another
Choose
version
Your
is
Adventure book. Do you remember those?
Yes, I do. By
It's
the way,
kind
the
of like
movie
that.
on that subject is Discovery, which stars Robert Redford. If you want to see a good movie on the idea of quantum immortality or quantum suicide, watch Discovery. It's a fascinating movie.
Discovery with Robert Redford.
Hmm.
I've never heard of
Came
that
out.
movie. How is that
It,
possible?
it came out about a year ago, or maybe 2 years. It was kind of a sleeper independent film, but it's if you watch it, you'll get a darn good idea of what they're talking about with quantum immortality, or at least quantum suicide.
Now, the problem that they had in Fringe, and it kind of makes sense a little bit, more than just a little bit, is that when they opened up this portal, it basically began um, swapping matter, and being that matter cannot take cannot replace itself with itself, it was actually dissolved. It was destroying itself, and it was like the destruction of mankind that was happening. And granted, this is a very science fiction show, but the theory behind it makes kind of a great deal of sense to me anyway. And it was as though like these buildings were crumbling because there were two buildings in the same exact
Location,
space. Yeah,
space
within
time, space time.
exactly. You
Yep.
that's why you're here to say that. I'm sorry. But and I have to wonder, are these ripples evidence of something like that? I mean, do you think that that's a possibility?
Well, I have to be honest that the Mandela effect, I mean, we all grew up in the generations before us did, and none of us seem to have this Mandela effect having gone on. And it doesn't seem to have hit until the 90s. And then things started changing. And now, even things that happened before the 90s have changed, but it all seems to have come to a head in the 90s from then forward. Friends, that episode I talked about, 90s, early 90s.
Hmm.
Dazed and Confused, early 90s. And so something, but there is the idea of retrocausal reality as well. In quantum physics, an equation works either way. Time doesn't matter. You can have cause and effect and then cause. It works just as well either way. Einstein himself said that time travel is theoretically possible. So has something started in the 90s or maybe in 2010 that has had a retrocausal effect on us? When they started up these quantum computers, has it as retrocausality come into play where it's affecting our past, changing things in our past? And that's why some of us are remembering it some way and some others. Maybe timelines are mixing. It may be that you and I aren't from the same timeline, that we just, and these timelines are so close that they're saying that some of them may be the difference of only one atom splitting or not splitting. Other than that, they're identical.
Hmm.
So can we cross over? Is it fairly easy? Are we crossing over all the time? Are we slipping back and forth? When you walk out of your office to see your wife, is that really your wife, or is she someone from a parallel timeline? It could be happening from instant to instant.
Wow, that's a very deep concept.
It's
Um,
spooky.
One thing I would be fascinated to understand is maybe what might be the oldest Mandela effect. Like we keep calling it Mandela effect, but the earliest occurrence of this phenomena. I guess it wouldn't be too hard to track it down, but it's also about memory. So, and like we were saying
Well,
before,
with
memory is
with
not perfect.
Ford, we could trace it back to the 40s and 50s at the very least, and 60s. We can do it with other things, for instance, like the Monopoly game, and whether he wears a medallion, I mean a
A
monocle or
monocle,
not.
yeah.
And that goes back to the 1930s. So it could be that whatever is happening is beginning to stretch further and further back into time. It may be you used the term ripple effect. It may very well be just that is slowly passing backward in time. And who knows, it may be traveling forward in time as well.
Wow.
Uh, because Einstein says the future already exists and it's there and it's irrevocable.
It's a wild world that we live in, and I appreciate your time tonight, Rob. It's a fascinating discussion. You've opened my eyes to a moon that will not crack. Um,
No, your eggshell theory is wrong.
we've come to a complete conclusion.
Yeah,
the moon will be intact throughout our existence on this planet.
Well, I didn't say that.
All right, damn it. Well, Rob, thank you seriously so much for taking the time out to be here. You can find out more about Rob at robshelsky.blogspot.com. Are there any other websites that you'd like to mention?
Sure. Yeah, I don't even bother with the blog spot. I mean,
oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. They can go there. They'll find everything. But really, just go to Amazon. Just type in under Kindle. Just type in my last name, and everything I have comes up. You've got a good idea of who I am, and it's even a biography.
And your books are really for every budget too, which is also great. You can go there and you can really find out a lot of really amazing stuff, and I look forward to adding quite a bit of this to my collection. I'd love to invite you again in the future. Anytime, the door is wide open, so anytime you want to, swing by, you're always welcome.
Well, thank you, Mark. I enjoyed this very much.